Number 3, fighter to watch. In 2026, I've got Francis Ngannou. And I got Francis on this list because I haven't the foggiest idea what he wants to do, but I know there is still some opportunity for him to do it. When your fight career is over, there's a number of things that you will miss. Now, in all fairness, and for the most part, fighting sucks. Who wants to do that? I mean, really, who wants to do that? Who wants to get up at 5:30 and run? Who wants as a reward 3 times a year you got to get in a ring and fight some other dude that also thought it was a good idea to get up at 5:30 in the morning and run? Like, for the most part. But there's a number of things that get taken for granted. The opportunity, it's very small. The opportunity to have a chance to go and compete 3 times a year, to have people that are interested and people that want to watch you, to have an opponent that's willing to do the same thing just so the event and the competition can take place, just so that you have somebody to go out there and compete with, a promoter that's going to go through all the licensing. As the only sport on the face of this earth regulated by government, somebody's going to do a lot of work to make sure that you even have the opportunity to step in there. And those are the things that you never think of when you're going through it. Those are the things that you would take for granted. And then once you have those very minute things, where are you going to fight? Do you have somebody that can write a check? Do you have an opponent? Do you suck so bad nobody wants to fight you? Have you gotten so good that everyone's scared to fight you? Like, there is a spectrum there in MMA. It gets covered, it gets talked about in a number of different ways, but it's still the spectrum and it's still the truth. So what do you do when you're Francis? And I think Francis very much sits on that spectrum. If he wants to go over and box, the high-level boxers aren't going to pay him. They're not going to want him. Somebody isn't going to go through the licensing and the medicals to make it possible for a guy who's 40 years old or claims to be 40 years old, or if we can all agree is at least 40 years old, to go out there and box. Like, that isn't overly realistic. It could happen, but it's probably not. And then you've got an opportunity in MMA. And I know that sounds very rude, what I just said about Francis and boxing, but I can relate to it. There's not somebody that's going to go through all of that headache and hassle so that I can go out there and box. So it's not meant as an upset, as an insult, as much as just a reality of a guy that's never won a boxing match. Sorry, you're in a spot where you want to box, but you've never won a boxing match, and so you don't have an opponent. Moreover, you don't have a promoter to have you do it. Great, no problem, because that was for fun anyway. You're an MMA fighter. Well, let's take a look at that. Where are you going to do MMA? And this, again, this is why Francis is on this list. Where are you going to do MMA? It would appear to me in the PFL would be an option, and that would be the only option. But what does the PFL want to do with him? They've talked about Nemkov. That's plenty interesting for me. And you may not have the foggiest idea that Nemkov even moved up to the heavyweight class, but he's a real challenge, and that's a fairly interesting match. You also have, in free agency, Gable Steveson. Now, could you get Francis to fight Gable? It would seem as though if you're the promoter and you're writing the check and you got 2 guys under contract, you could get anybody to fight anybody. It would seem. But it wasn't any longer than a week ago that Francis passed up on many, many millions of dollars to box Jake Paul. So, and he passed up on it. He was fine with the money. He was fine with the sport. He said, this opponent doesn't make sense. He doesn't have enough experience. He isn't looked at and viewed by the world highly enough. Now, I don't know what those things mean. I couldn't care less. The easier the opponent, for the bigger the paycheck, would be my goal. That is what would make me pat my manager on the back and tell him he did a good job. But Francis has shown us that he doesn't necessarily look at it that way. And I'm bringing that to you because what's the point of Nemkov, Francis? I mean, aren't we just playing along? Aren't we just nodding our head and saying that we want to fight for the sake of nodding our head and saying that we want to fight? If we have the ability to have Gable Steveson versus Francis, isn't that the fight we want? As a matter of fact, if you're a fight fan, and you are, if you're sitting here on the sports biggest channel and you're watching this piece, there's probably not 5 fights you'd rather see in the entire year. There's probably not 5 mythical fights if you had a magic wand that you would make without making Francis Ngannou versus Gable Steveson. So what's the point? I mean, if you get Francis in there with Nemkov, but you couldn't get him in there with Gable, what's the point of getting him in there with Nemkov? Because Nemkov will get in there with Gable. Follow my math. I mean, it's a really tough thing where, as a promoter, there are times that you do have to remind everybody who's in charge. And it's the same way in everything in life. The guy in charge is whoever is writing the check. And if the guy writing the check says, I'll put Francis with Nemkov, but I'd rather put Francis with Gable, I just don't know if I can get Francis to fight Gable. I mean, at some point, you snap out of it. You say, it's my money. It's my promotion. I'm going to book the matches that I want. So is a willingness or an opportunity in 2026 going to present itself for Francis Ngannou? We shall stick around, but for that very reason, he makes my list and comes in at number 3.